Welcome to Cracked Open, a podcast about life, love, loss, and the truths we discover along the way. Together, we'll explore the struggles that shape us, the lessons we carry, and the hope that keeps us moving forward. This is more than stories. It's honesty, it's healing, it's real. Let's get started. And now your host, Glen Nunes.
Have you ever felt abandoned by the very God you've put your whole life believing in? And not because you stopped believing in Him, but because you couldn't feel Him anymore? You still pray, you still go to church, you still try to do the right thing, but the comfort's gone, and the answers are gone, and the peace is gone. So welcome to what many call the dark night of the soul. What if the worst season of your life isn't punishment? What if it isn't failure? What if it isn't even the enemy? What if it's God doing His deepest work in the dark? Have you ever had a season where nothing made sense anymore? The prayers felt unanswered. The hope felt exhausted. The motivation disappeared. The people that you loved walked away. The things that you built no longer brought you joy. You still believed in God, you just couldn't feel Him. And you still went to church, you just couldn't hear Him. You still prayed, and you just wondered if anyone was listening. For some people, it's the loss of a marriage. For others, it's grief, depression, addiction, loneliness, a health crisis, a dream that died, a life that suddenly became unrecognizable. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, they begin asking questions that they never thought they would ask. Where is God? Why is this happening? Why won't this pain leave? Why does everyone else seem to be moving forward while I'm standing still? For centuries, believers have had a name for this place. A place between faith and feeling. A place between hope and despair. A place where God feels silent. And they called it the dark night of the soul. And if you've ever found yourself there, this episode is for you. But it's also going to encourage you, hopefully. So what if the darkest season of your life is actually preparing you for the brightest chapter that you haven't seen yet? The dark night of the soul is not where God abandons you. It's often where He does His deepest work. There is a difference between being in a graveyard and being in a womb. Both are dark. Both feel like the end of the world. But one is a place of death, and the other one is a place of birth. If you woke up today feeling completely lost in a funk, feeling worthless, and sitting at the absolute bottom of the barrel, I need you to hear me right now. You are not buried. You are planted. God didn't turn the lights out in your life to punish you. He turned them out to protect you from the noise while He does open heart surgery on your spirit. Stop begging for a flashlight to run back to the things that broke you and start listening to what the darkness is trying to teach you. Your story isn't over. Your rebirth starts right now. So, welcome back to Cracked Open. I'm your host, Glen Nunes. And first and foremost, a massive thank you to everyone tuning in, subscribing, and sitting wherever you are today with me. If this is your first time checking out the show, welcome to the family. And if you're a returning listener, thank you for your continued support. You've been living this journey with me in real time. I have a notepad app on my computer and on my phone, and it's listed with nearly over 500 different topics listed because my brain never stops. When I get these ideas of podcasts, I go on my phone and I said, this would be a good idea. And I looked the other day, I'm like, I'm over 500. I'm like, this is crazy. But the very truth is, when I get up to this mic every week, I often have no idea what I'm going to talk about, which is crazy. I do these right at the exact moment that I sit down in the chair sometimes. There's days I wake up at 6 or 7 in the morning and my brain starts spiraling so bad that I can't even drag myself out of bed until 11 o'clock. And there's days that I say that I'm not doing this today. I'm going to quit everything and walk away. But sometimes, through the fog and through the wait, I find myself right back here at the microphone. I have not missed a single week, and I refuse to break that consistency, at least as of right now. So here I am. Again, welcome back, everyone. So I don't know where you're listening to. You might be on a morning walk. You might be working. You might be sitting in your car. Maybe you just had a long shift. Or maybe you're just lying awake at night trying to make sense of things and you found this. I'm grateful that you're spending this time with me, though. So if you're new to the podcast, Cracked Open is where we have honest conversations about life, heartbreak, encouragement, faith, healing, personal growth, and all kind of struggles that we all face but don't always talk about. So this isn't a podcast about pretending everything's okay. It's a podcast about what happens when life cracks us open and how sometimes those cracks become the very places where growth, wisdom, encouragement, and healing begin. So today's episode, it's called The Dark Night of the Soul. Maybe you've heard this phrase before, maybe you haven't, but chances are you've lived it. It's that season where everything feels dark. As I said, the prayers seem unanswered, the future feels uncertain, the things that once brought you joy don't seem to move you anymore. You just feel disconnected. You're exhausted, lost. You wonder if God hears you, if your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling. And you wonder if life will ever feel normal again. You wonder if you'll ever be the same person that you were before the pain. If you could just go back and reset. But life doesn't do that for us, does it? We have to go through these things. And if you've ever found yourself asking those questions, then, as I said earlier, this episode may be for you. So today we're going to talk about what the dark night of the soul really is, and why so many people experience it, and what we can learn from it, and why what feels like an ending may actually be the beginning of something God is doing deep within us. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's walk through this together. Let's define what the dark night of the soul actually means, because people mistake the dark night for a permanent defeat. When you love somebody with everything you have, and then you watch them make choices that break your heart, and you feel betrayed, isolated, and maybe you're treated like a temporary option, or if your son or your daughter has walked out on you or turned their back on you, and you just lost, and you feel lost as a parent, or it could be somebody close to you that just everything went wrong. And it crushes your spirit. It really does. It makes you feel completely detached from the world, like your soul is gone. But the dark night of the soul is timeless spiritual principle. It is a mandatory transition point before a massive spiritual promotion. It is the space where human effort and ego completely fail so that pure supernatural faith can take over. This topic matters because you cannot rise into the next season of your life carrying the codependency and the pain of your past. The old version of you, it has to die so a steel-plated, unshakable version of you can be born. We are going to talk about how to stand flat-footed in the dark, trust the divine timing, and get ready for the turnaround, because it's coming. So, what exactly is this dark night of the soul? The phrase itself sounds dark, doesn't it? It sounds hopeless, depressing. But that's not really what it means. The dark night of the soul is a spiritual season where everything you once relied on seems to disappear. The feelings are gone, the excitement's gone, the certainty's gone, answers are gone, and sometimes even the sense of God's presence feels gone. But you still believe, you just don't feel. And you still pray, you just don't hear anything back, but you still show up. And you sit there wondering if any of it matters. And for centuries, people of faith have experienced this. It wasn't invented by psychologists. It wasn't invented by self-help books. The phrase actually comes from a Christian mystic named St. John of the Cross, who described seasons where God seemed absent, silent, and distant. But here's what made his teaching so powerful. He believed the dark night wasn't punishment. He believed it was preparation. He believed that God sometimes removes the things that we've been leaning on so we can learn to lean fully on him. So think about that. What if the darkness isn't proof that God left? What if the darkness is where he's doing his deepest work? What if that's true? Because most of us think faith means always feeling strong and always confident and always feeling close to God. But real faith often begins when those feelings disappear. Anybody can praise God when life is going well, and anyone can trust when the answers are obvious. But what about when the prayers aren't answered? What about when the relationship doesn't come back, or your child doesn't come back, or you lose someone? What about if the diagnosis doesn't change? What about when you're exhausted, confused, discouraged, and still expected to keep walking? That's where the dark night of the soul begins. It's the season where God stops being an idea and becomes a necessity. It's the season where you discover whether your faith was built on feelings or built on something deeper. And here's the encouraging part. And as season 3 goes along here, I want to move forward and make everything as encouraging as I can. And this is what I meant by the encouraging part. Every great story in Scripture has a dark night. Joseph had a prison. David had a cave. Job had unimaginable loss. Elijah sat under a tree asking God to take his life. And even Jesus had Gethsemane. So darkness is not evidence that God has abandoned you. Sometimes darkness is evidence that a transformation is taking place that you can't see yet. The dark night of the soul is not the end of faith. It's often where faith grows up. It's where the shallow roots become deep roots, and it's where borrowed faith becomes personal faith. And while it may feel like you're falling apart, you may actually be becoming the person God is preparing you to be all along. And one of the biggest mistakes people make when they're going through the dark night of the soul is believing something is wrong with them. They think it's them. I've done this. They think they're failing. They think they're weak. They think they're worthless. They think they're losing their faith. But often, they're experiencing something that countless people before them have experienced. So let's talk about a few signs. The first sign is spiritual dryness. You pray, but it feels mechanical. You read scripture, but nothing seems to jump off the page. Nothing moves you. Just nothing. You go to church, but you leave feeling empty. And not because God isn't there, but because you're no longer living on emotions. You're learning how to walk by faith. And the second sign, it's isolation. You begin pulling away, and not necessarily because you hate people, but because you're exhausted. You don't have the energy to explain what you're feeling. You don't have the energy to wear the mask. You don't have the energy to keep saying, I'm fine. So what do? You retreat. And the third sign is questioning everything. You question your beliefs, your purpose, every relationship, your future. And the things you once felt certain about suddenly all become foggy. And that can be terrifying. It's a scary, terrifying thing. And the fourth sign is emotional exhaustion. Not physical tiredness, soul tiredness. The kind of tired where sleep doesn't fix, vacations won't fix it, distractions won't fix it. Because the battle isn't happening around you, it's happening within you. And here's something important. Many people confuse the dark of the soul with punishment. But throughout history, some of the greatest spiritual leaders experienced it. All of them. Mother Teresa wrote about decades of spiritual dryness. David cried out asking where God was many times through the Psalms. Elijah wanted to quit. Job questioned everything. Even Jesus cried out from the cross. The dark night is not proof that you failed. It's proof that you're human. And another powerful truth is this. The dark night strips away illusions. It forces us to confront things that we may have avoided for years. Our fears, our idols, our attachments, our need for control, our dependence on approval, our dependence on people, our dependence on outcomes. And while that process is painful, it can also be incredibly freeing. Because sometimes God removes what we've been leaning on so we can discover what actually holds us up. And here's another hard truth. Growth rarely happens in comfort. Muscles grow through resistance. Ask any trainer. Diamonds are formed under pressure. And faith is often strengthened in uncertainty. Most people want resurrection. Nobody wants the tomb. Most people want the testimony, but nobody wants the trial. Most people want the victory. Nobody wants the battle. But the truth is, the things that shape us more often are the things that we would never choose. And maybe that's why so many people find purpose on the other side of their darkest seasons. Because the dark night of the soul has a way of teaching us what truly matters. It teaches us what remains when everything else falls away. And sometimes that's where the healing begins. I remember having a conversation with an old boss of mine many years ago. I had a really trying time years ago in my life. I remember my boss asking me some questions. And he was a very wealthy guy. He was trying so hard for anybody to notice him, and he would take people out to dinner and spend money and throw his money around. And he said to me once, he said, "Hey, what is going on with you? I don't understand." He goes, "It seems like everybody likes you." He knew what I had gone through. And he said, "Hey, I know what you went through and are going through. How can you be so positive and so cheery all the time, and everybody wants to hang with you?" I was in my 20s at the time. And he said, "There's a bunch of these girls in here that are attracted to you like crazy, and I don't understand it." I remember saying to him that the person I am today, I would have never became this person I am today if I didn't go through what I went through. I said, "You're going to have to go through this to gain the knowledge and the person you are. But afterwards, you're going to be this person, and you're going to gain this knowledge, and this is who you're going to become." Or, I said to him, if there was a second option where you're not going to go through any of that, but you're not going to be who you are today, I said, I would go back and do it 1,000 times over. I would even question it. And he was blown away by the answer. I give credit to God and Jesus because it was when I turned my life over to Jesus, and it helped me immensely. It changed my whole outlook on life. So saying that, let's take a look at the psychological and spiritual facts of what happens when you enter the dark night. Fact number 1, when a toxic situation starts going south, the spirits collide. You have to understand the spiritual mechanics of what happens when an evil connection is forced together. When a fun-loving, outgoing person gets isolated by a controlling, miserable parasite who snaps over anything and calls them vicious names and degrading names. Those two spirits, they cannot coexist in peace, and they never will. Two totally different spirits, and they'll never, ever be in unison. It just doesn't work that way. And I don't know your situation, but I'm just using this as an example. I want to tell you about the sermon that I have. It's etched right into the skin on my arm. I have this tattoo. It's a crystal ball, and it honors the real deep spiritual legacy of my mom. And my mom was a fortune teller. She used to read cards, not the tarot cards, but she was into this fortune telling, which I never agreed with, but she had people coming back to her for decades with tape recorders and notes, and she would have parties at people's houses. People would sit down one after the next for her to read their cards. I had friends that would come over my house and go hang with my mother so she could read their cards. And like I said, she wasn't one of those tarot card amateur people. She was a real fortune teller with real cards, and it seemed like to people that she understood the deeper layers of life. If you knew her, you know what I'm talking about. But inside the glass ball that's on my arm, there's a heavy stone wall and a massive arc bridge that's crossing over chaotic, turbulent waters. And towering over the very top of the entire piece is a massive phoenix rising straight out of the flames, surrounded by these heavy gears of divine timing. The tattoo is the exact blueprint of how you survive the dark night of the soul. I love how it came out. So the stone wall was a boundary that God forces you to build to keep evil out of your temple. And the chaotic water underneath the bridge, it's all the messy, agonizing history, the lies, the broken promises, and all the false hopes that you had to swim through to get to the shore. And the bridge, It's a steel pathway of true, miraculous restoration that remains open for the future if it's God's will. So that's what the bridge is. That's God's will. Whatever it's going to happen, that's what the bridge represents. And the phoenix and the gears, this is the most important part. You cannot rise from the ashes until the fire has completely finished burning away your old, desperate self. And those gears are turning behind the scenes, shifting your destiny even when you feel completely frozen and worthless at the bottom of the barrel. So it's an interesting tattoo that has a lot of meaning to it. So that being said, let's talk about the absolute agony of standing still when the entire world is looking at you and calling you desperate or delusional. I know what people say. I know on those sidelines, they're full of self-appointed prophets and they think they know everything and even the final chapter of my life. They look at me waiting, hoping, and holding on to spiritual conviction, and they say, he's just whining, he's chasing a ghost, he's crazy. But let me tell you something about human predictions. They don't carry the authority of God's signature. I hold on to a hope that I feel deep within my spiritual body because I know my story, whatever I believe in my heart, is not done. I have dreams about certain things day and night. And the easy thing to do, the secular thing to do, would just say, screw it, and just walk away from whatever. But me, I don't work that way. I hang on to my faith. It makes me realize that sometimes things could look terrible, and this is throughout history. And even in my own personal life, things can look horrible. And yet, God could keep that wire hot, and he may be keeping it hot for a reason. And those of you who have been with me throughout the podcast, it's been ups and downs, and I don't have to hide that. It's been interesting, but I had somebody close and near and dear to my heart say, I don't know how you waited. I don't know how you have faith like you do, and you just sit and wait, and you have this amazing faith. Nobody I know would ever do that, at least not in this world. This is somebody I've been with when they were at their rock bottom before. And she told me, she says, you know what? You're my rock. And I've had deep conversations, and this person has told me that I'm the only person that's ever settled her heart. And as I said, this is not about me. I want this to be positive, and I want to get back to the topic at hand. But I go down rabbit holes, you guys all know. But this person taking major gambles. But the truth is, I know it's hanging heavy on her soul. But when you find yourself standing in that exact place, looking at a situation that looks completely dead, you have to look at history. That's why I said this is not about me. Nobody specific. You have to look at the stories of people whose situations look completely buried right before the miracle showed up. Let me tell you about Harry Houdini, the greatest escape artist that has ever walked the face of the earth. Houdini made a living at getting chained up, locked in iron boxes, and thrown into freezing rivers. The crowd would stand on the dock checking their watches. 1 minute would go by, 2 minutes would go by, 3 minutes would go by, and the crowd would stop murmuring. People would literally start crying, saying, he's dead, he didn't make it this time, it's a funeral. And at times, managers would grab axes ready to chop through the ice to pull his corpse out. And right at the absolute last second, when the percentages hit absolute zero and everyone had already written the obituary, Houdini would break the surface of the water, gasping for air, completely free. The crowd didn't understand that the delay wasn't his defeat. The delay was the setup for the greatest climax the audience had ever witnessed. Think about the miracle of Dunkirk. In 1940, over 300,000 Allied soldiers were completely surrounded by the Nazi army, trapped on a beach with their backs to the sea. The military experts in London, they had already drafted the surrender papers. They told the king it was a funeral, a total slaughter, and it looked completely hopeless. But instead of a massacre, the sea went dead calm, a thick fog rolled into the block of the enemy bombers, and an armada of tiny civilian fishing boats sailed across the channel to pull every single one of those men off the sand. What looked like the graveyard of the British Army became the birthplace of their ultimate victory. So when you're sitting at rock bottom and the critics are counting you out, you need to remember these stories, The world will always call your situation a funeral because they don't have the spiritual eyes to see the resurrection that is happening beneath the surface. And I wish I could tell you I learned everything I'm talking about today from a book, but I didn't. I did a lot of research on these stories, but my stories, I learned it by living it. And to be honest, I'm still living in things. I've said it many times. I've had a tough year. I've had loss, confusion, the loneliness, the depression. You've heard it all. And some people are probably like, when's he going to stop talking about it? And I've questioned things that I never thought I'd question. And I have wondered where God was. I wondered why some prayers seem to just go unanswered. I wonder why some doors remain closed no matter how hard I knocked. And there were days that I didn't even recognize myself. Days where I couldn't focus. Days I couldn't find any motivation. And days just getting out of bed felt like a victory. And days that I sat in my car wondering, where the hell is my life even going? I think one of the loneliest parts of the dark night of the soul is that from the outside, life often looks normal. People would see me playing music, going to work, posting my advertisements on social media. I'm showing up, dependable, involved in my music gives, running benefit concerts, smiling. But inside, fighting battles nobody sees, carrying questions nobody can answer, and trying to hold on to faith while everything around you feels uncertain. I remember standing in church one day just saying, I hope I feel something, anything, comfort, peace, a direction, a sign, a crumb. And I walked out of that church that day feeling the same exact way I walked in. And not because God wasn't there, but because sometimes the dark night isn't about feelings. It's about faith. It's about continuing to walk even when you don't feel the emotion that used to carry you. And it's about trusting even when you don't understand. And if I'm being honest, there were times I wanted to quit. And not life, but the fight, the waiting, the wondering, the constant emotional exhaustion. I was tired. My soul, extremely tired. The kind of tired where nothing seems to refill the tank. Not music, not success, not distractions, not even things that used to bring me joy. And maybe some of you listening understand exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe you're in that place right now. If you are, keep listening. It's going to get better. Maybe you're showing up every day while carrying weight that nobody else sees. Maybe you're questioning your future. Maybe you're questioning your purpose. Maybe you're wondering if things will ever even change. If that's you, I want you to hear something. The fact that you're still standing means something. And the fact that you're still listening means something. And the fact that you're still fighting means something. Even if you feel like you've lost your fight, you're fighting. You're definitely fighting. Because the dark night of the soul doesn't happen to people who have stopped caring. It happens to people who are searching, people who are growing, and people who are being transformed even when they can't see it. And while I don't have all the answers, I do know this. Some of the strongest people I've ever met weren't the ones who avoided darkness. They were the ones who walked through it and refused to stay there. And that's what I'm trying to do. And that's what I want you to do. And I'm talking one day at a time, one prayer at a time, one step at a time. Baby steps. I want to tell you a few stories, and not because they're famous, and not because they're dramatic, but because they remind us that darkness is something that every human being eventually faces. So let's start with Elijah. You know, I've talked about Elijah through my podcasts. Elijah has just experienced one of the greatest victories in his life. He called down fire from heaven. He defeated the prophets of Baal. He witnessed God's power in an incredible way. And then something happened. One threat, one voice, one moment of fear. And what did Elijah do? He ran. He sat beneath a broom tree and he prayed something shocking. He asked God to take his life. Think about that. One of the greatest prophets in Scripture, a man who had witnessed miracles, a man who had seen God move, and yet became so exhausted, so discouraged, so emotionally drained that he wanted to quit. And what did God do? Didn't scold him, didn't shame him, didn't lecture him. Nope. He let him rest, he fed him, he strengthened him, and only later did God speak. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is rest. Be still and know that I am God. Now let's talk about David. David wrote some of the most beautiful Psalms ever recorded. But many of those Psalms, it came from caves, from betrayal, from loneliness, from fear, from seasons when he cried out, "How long, O Lord? How long?" David wasn't pretending. He wasn't putting on a mask. He brought his pain directly to God, and maybe that's part of the lesson. Faith is not pretending you're okay. Faith is bringing your brokenness to God no matter what. And I want to talk about C.S. Lewis. Those of you who don't know C.S. Lewis, go read his books and Google him. He's talked about through many churches and through sermons and very inspiring stuff. Most people knew him as the author of the Chronicles of Narnia. What most people didn't know is after his wife Joy died, he entered one of the darkest, deepest spiritual crises of his life. This is a man who wrote books defending Christianity. He was a brilliant thinker, a man of faith, and after losing Joy, he wrote this, "Where is God?" He described praying and feeling like the door was bolted from the inside, and not because he stopped believing, but because he couldn't feel God's presence. That's the dark night of the soul. Not atheism, not rebellion, faith that suddenly feels empty. We're humans here. And yet, he eventually emerged with a deeper faith than before. And I want to talk about another guy, Admiral James Stockdale. This was the highest-ranking American officer. He was held prisoner in Vietnam. Years of torture, years of uncertainty, years of isolation. These are years. Years. When asked how he survived, he talked about accepting reality exactly as it was while refusing to give up hope. His famous lesson became known as the Stockdale Paradox. Never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end with the discipline to confront the brutal facts of your current reality. So what happens when God feels silent? Lewis lived that, and he wrote about it beautifully. If a man like C.S. Lewis could go through the dark night of the soul, maybe it doesn't mean we're broken when we go through one as well. And let's talk about Robin Williams. He's been on my mind. I might do a podcast on this guy. I've been doing some research on him. One of the funniest people who's ever lived. A man who made millions laughing. A man who seemed larger than life. Yet behind the smile was a battle most people couldn't see. That's one of the tragedies of our world. We often assume the loudest laugh belongs to the happiest person. Sometimes it belongs to the person hurting the most. And the lesson here, it isn't that Robin Williams was weak. The lesson is that pain doesn't care how talented you are, how famous, how successful, how much money you have. Pain visits everyone. And think about Mother Teresa. Many people don't realize that for years, decades actually, she wrote about feeling spiritual dryness, feeling God's silence, feeling abandoned. Yet she kept serving, she kept loving, she kept showing up. Imagine that. She didn't keep going because she was inspired every day. She kept going because she made a decision. That's why. I also want to talk about this guy, David Goggins. Most people know him as an ultra-marathon runner, a former Navy SEAL, and sometimes who built his reputation for pushing through incredible physical pain. But underneath all that was a man who hit rock bottom. He was overweight, lost, angry, broken. He was a man that looked in the mirror and did not like what he saw. And what makes his story powerful isn't the races, it isn't the military, it isn't the records. It's that he stopped running from himself. He sat in the darkness. He confronted his pain, his fears, his excuses, his trauma, and he made a decision to become someone different. Now, whether you agree with all these methods or not, there's a lesson there. Transformation only begins with brutal honesty. And the dark night of the soul forces us to look in that mirror. Not the mirror that shows us our face, the mirror that shows us our heart. And while that process is painful, it can also become the beginning of a completely different life. Goggin often talks about taking souls. And in psychological terms, he explains that this can be reframed as breaking down your own egoic limitations. During periods of intense misery and extreme endurance, he forced himself to confront his inner pain, his deep traumas, and self-hatred head-on. He recognized that his mind's desire to quit was a defense mechanism, and he had to sit in the darkness and the misery to dissect it. He discovered that in order to truly transform, he had to embrace the suffering. The process of running 100-mile races on broken feet was essentially his crucible. It was a metaphorical death of his old broken self and the birth of a disciplined, enduring version of himself. And I wanted to mention him because of how the dark night of the soul doesn't always come through a spiritual retreat. It often looks like an individual sitting alone in a dark room or enduring a grueling physical ordeal, confronting their own demons and rebuilding their entire reality from scratch. And maybe that's one of the greatest lessons in the dark night of the soul. You keep walking, and not because you feel strong, but because stopping won't get you where you need to go. And maybe that's where some of you are right now. If this is you and you're listening to me, and you're tired, you're disappointed, you're carrying grief, you're heartbroken, you have questions, and you're wondering if you're the only one, you're not. And if you know someone that's going through this, pull up a chair and sit beside them. That's your job today. I want you to look around. If you know someone that's hurting, be a light to humanity and help them out. And every person that I've talked about today walked through darkness. Every one of them questioned. Every one of them struggled. Every one of them hurt. But the darkness wasn't the end of their story. And it won't be the end of yours either. Because one thing I've learned is this. The dark night of the soul is not where people are destroyed. It's often where they're transformed. And not overnight, not all at once, but one step, one prayer, and one day at a time. And if there's one thing Scripture teaches us, it's that God's greatest work is often done in the dark, not done in the spotlight, or on the mountaintop, or during the victory lap. It's in the wilderness, and the waiting, and the silence. And let's start with Joseph. Joseph was given a dream from God. He's given a promise, a vision for his future, and then everything fell apart. He was betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, forgotten in prison. Have you ever felt forgotten? Put yourself in David's shoes. Think about that. God gave him a dream, and then life looked nothing like the dream. Can any of you relate to that? Have you ever believed that God was leading you somewhere or gave you something, and then you watched everything go in the total opposite direction? Joseph spent years in the dark, years wondering, years waiting, years with questions. But what he couldn't see was that God was still working behind the scenes. It's so hard. It's easier said than done. The pit wasn't the end. The prison wasn't the end. The waiting wasn't the end. God was preparing him for something greater than he could even imagine. And then there's Job. I love the book of Job. This man lost almost everything. His wealth, his health, his children, his security. And what makes his story so powerful isn't just what he lost. It's that he never understood why. We know because we read the story. But Job didn't. Job had to live with it. And sometimes we're looking for answers that God never gives. Sometimes we don't get explanations. Sometimes we only get his presence. And sometimes there has to be enough. And going back to David, before he became king, he became an outlaw. Before he wore a crown, he lived in caves. Before he was celebrated, he was hunted. The Psalms are filled with all kind of raw emotion, fear, loneliness, confusion, grief. David did not hide his pain. He brought them directly to God. And that's why his words still resonate thousands of years later. And as we spoke about Elijah, one of the greatest victories of his life, he crashed. He crashed spiritually, emotionally, mentally. He wanted to quit. But God never abandoned him, did he? God met him in his exhaustion. And maybe that's important for you if you're listening today and you feel that way. God doesn't just meet us in our strength. He meets us in our weakness. He meets us in our breaking points. And he meets us when we have nothing left. And finally, Jesus. Because no discussion about the dark night of the soul is complete without talking about Gethsemane. The night before the cross, Jesus knew what was coming. The betrayal, the suffering, the humiliation, the pain. And what did he pray? Father, if it possible, let this cup pass from me. Even Jesus expressed his anguish. Even Jesus wrestled with the weight of what lay ahead. And then came those powerful words, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. That wasn't surrender because life was easy. That was surrender in the middle of the agony. And that's faith. Not when everything makes sense. Not when everything works out. But when you continue to trust God despite not understanding the path. When everything looks terrible. When it looks over. When it looks real bad. Hang on to that faith. Because opinions and how everything looks doesn't matter. None of that matters. The truth is, every major figure in Scripture experienced a dark night. Joseph had a prison, David had a cave, Job had suffering, Elijah had despair, Jesus had Gethsemane. And if you're walking through your own dark season right now, you're not disqualified. You're not forgotten. You're not abandoned. In many ways, you're walking a road that some of God's greatest servants have walked before you. And while the darkness may feel endless, Scripture reminds us again and again that God does some of his greatest work in places where we can barely see his hand moving. Faith isn't believing because you can see. Faith is continuing to walk when you can't. And sometimes the dark night of the soul is where that kind of faith is born. And when you open up the Word, you see a striking pattern, don't you? God's greatest turnarounds always start looking like a total funeral. The world operates on human percentages, but God operates on divine timing. And when human percentages hit absolute zero, that is the exact coordinate where a miracle takes place. Look at Moses standing at the edge of the Red Sea. From a human standpoint, it looked like a massacre was about to happen. He had a massive wall of water in front of him and Pharaoh's heavy chariots closing in fast behind him. The people started panicking. They were crying and screaming at Moses. They were saying, "Did you bring us here out into the wilderness to just die?" It looked like a graveyard. But Exodus 14, it tells us that Moses stood flat-footed, looked at the crowd and said, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. The Egyptians whom today you shall see again no more forever." Moses didn't panic because he was looking at the crisis with human eyes. He raised his staff. The wind blew all night. That massive wall of water split wide open. And what looked like their funeral became the graveyard of their enemies and the birthplace of their freedom. And look at the story of Jairus' daughter. In Mark chapter 5, Jairus was a leader in the temple who came to Jesus. He fell at his feet and he begged him to heal his little girl who was dying. And while they were walking to his house, a crowd delayed them. And right then, messengers arrived from Jairus' house and dropped a bomb on him. They said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" They were basically telling him it's over. Cancel the prayers. Call the undertaker. It's a funeral. But Jesus overheard those words. He looked straight into Jairus' eyes and he gave him the ultimate blueprint for the dark night of the soul. He said, "Don't be afraid. Only believe." And when they got to the house, people were weeping, they were wailing, and they were mocking Jesus because he told them that the girl was just sleeping. He put the mockers out of the room, and he walked up to the bed. He took the little girl by the hand and said, "Talitha kumai," "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And she immediately stood up and walked. Amazing. And then you have Lazarus in John chapter 11. Jesus intentionally waited 4 days after Lazarus died before he even showed up in Bethany. And by the time he got there, Martha looked at him with tears in her eyes and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know whatever you ask of God, God will give you." Lazarus wasn't just sick. He was buried in a cave with a massive stone rolled in front of it. And the text says that he was already starting to decay. It was a literal funeral. But Jesus didn't care about the timeline, the stone, or the decay, or the smell, or anything. He walked right up to the mouth of that cave and shouted, "Lazarus, come forth." And the man who had been dead for 4 days walked right out of the tomb, completely wrapped in his burial clothes, fully alive. There is a massive spiritual lesson in these three stories for anyone sitting on rock bottom today. Sometimes God will intentionally let a situation go cold. He will let 27 days pass. He will let people come and go. He will let situations look completely dead, buried, and rotten to the point where the entire world is standing around checking their watches and calling people delusional for holding on to hope and faith. And why? Because he's establishing the stage for a resurrection. He allows it to look like a funeral so that when the wall splits and when the stone rolls away and when the dead thing walks out of the tomb, nobody on the sidelines can take the credit. Not the people saying negative things to you, not the people trying to crush your spirit, not the people trying to say things about people you love to hurt you when acting like they're helping you. None of those people can take the credit. All those critics, they can't take any credit for that. And if people are wedged into your life like these parasites I've talked about, they can't take the credit. The only one left standing is God, and he gets 100% of the glory. And if you're standing at the edge of your seat tonight, don't dilute your faith. Stand still, keep the wire hot, and watch the water move. Because there's nothing Jesus can't do, and there's no greater thing than God. So have patience, watch and learn, and witness. I want to help you navigate this heavy transition right into talking about music. So I've created a specific playlist for today's episode, and the link is right down in the description below. And I want to talk about a couple of songs that carry the exact midnight energy of a dark night. The first song I want to talk about is a song called I Wish I Never Met You. On the surface, it sounds like anger. It sounds like a door slamming shut. But when you listen to one of the final lines, I wish I never met you, but God knows that's a lie, you hear the absolute truth in that part of the song. It is the raw tug of war of a man who knows that despite the agonizing pain, the lessons, and the growth, and the love that was 100% real, it's the sound of a heart refusing to deny what it feels. And when the circumstances look completely broken, the second track on the list is another one called Please Come Home. In this song, home is not a specific building, a street address, or a house. Home was simply whenever we were together in the same room. That's what home was. I've played these a couple of times at my gigs, and it was incredibly emotional. My voice shook many times, and there were times I couldn't even get through the songs because wounds, man, sometimes wounds don't heal. They just stay fresh. But it's the honest cry of a soul standing flat-footed on a steel bridge waiting out the storm. So go hit that link in the description. I have a ton of songs in there, and I hope you enjoy the playlist. You can download all this on Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube. I'm on all the streaming platforms. Let these songs sit in the dark with you, and let the music speak to the spaces where your words have officially run out. Because one thing I've learned is that music has a way of reaching places that words sometimes can't. A song can say in 4 minutes what takes 4 years to understand. And when I think about the dark night of the soul, a couple of these songs that I'm putting in this playlist come to mind. The Sound of Silence, and not because it's depressing, because it captures what silence feels like. What happens when you're searching for answers and all you hear is your own thoughts echoing back in your head. It's terrible. And another song, Even If, by Mercy Me. It's one of the most honest songs about faith that I've heard in a long time. It's not a song that says everything is going to work out exactly the way you want. It's a song that asks the harder question. Can I still trust God even if the answer isn't what I hope for? And that's what real faith is, right? Not when everything goes right. Faith is when you're standing in uncertainty. And Broken Halos, I put this one in a few other podcasts as well. Because sometimes the people who change us most are the people who leave us way too soon. And sometimes the people carrying the deepest wounds are the very people helping everyone else heal. And I think about Tom Petty's The Waiting. Because if we're honest, a lot of life and a lot in life is waiting. Waiting for healing, for answers, for doors to open, for peace, for that next chapter. And sometimes the waiting becomes a lesson. And another song that I recommend listening to is Just Be Held by the Casting Crowns. The message is simple. When you're exhausted, overwhelmed, and when you're drowning in things that you can't control, stop fighting for just a moment. Stop trying to carry everything and let God hold on to what you're trying to hold. And that's not weakness, it's surrender. And maybe that's what the dark night of the soul is ultimately teaching us, that we were never meant to carry everything ourselves. So as always, I'll leave you with this playlist in the description. Listen to the songs, pay attention to the lyrics. Maybe one of them will say something to your heart that you need to hear right now. And before we take this to the altar today, I want to leave you with a direct reality check. If you're sitting in the dark right now, stop looking at your watch. Stop trying to calculate the human percentages. True victory doesn't look like a straight, clean line. True victory looks like a phoenix currently sitting inside a pile of ashes while waiting for the divine gears to finish turning behind the scenes. You are not worthless. You're not a temporary option. Never let a passing critic or a bitter mocker convince you to drop your tools and come down off your wall. Your hope is your compass. Keep it clean, keep it pure, and keep your head high. As we begin to wrap up this episode, I'm going to leave you with a final thought. What if you're not falling apart? What if you're being rebuilt? I know that's hard to believe when you're in the middle of something, when you're tired and discouraged, and you're praying and hearing nothing, and you feel like the prayers are bouncing off the ceiling. I get it. When you're trying to hold on to hope that feels like hope is slipping right through your fingers, like holding sand in your hands. I've been there. And it's not a fun battle. But one thing I've learned is that some of life's greatest transformations happen underground. A seed spends a long time buried before anyone sees growth. A caterpillar disappears into a cocoon long before it becomes a butterfly. Winter looks dead way before spring arrives. And if you live on the East Coast, you know that more than anybody. And sometimes God does his greatest work in seasons where we see the least evidence of it. The dark night of the soul feels like the end. But what if it's actually the beginning? What if the person you're becoming is stronger than the person you've been? What if the season is teaching you things comfort never could? And what if God is developing patience, endurance, wisdom, compassion, and faith that only could be formed through struggles? I know that's not always what we want to hear. We want relief, we want answers, we want the pain to stop. It's sickening, I get it. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with wanting all these things. But sometimes growth comes before the relief, and sometimes understanding comes after obedience. Sometimes peace comes before answers. And sometimes faith grows strongest when nothing around us makes sense. It looks really bleak. And if you're walking through your own dark night of the soul right now, I want you to hear this. You're not broken, you're not forgotten, you're not abandoned, and you're not the only one. The people we talked about today, Joseph, David, Job, Elijah, we talked about Mother Teresa, Robin Williams and his own struggle, and countless others. They all remind us that darkness is part of human experience, but darkness does not get the final word. Morning eventually will come. Healing eventually comes. Perspective eventually comes. And sometimes the very thing that you're praying to escape becomes the thing that transforms your life. And I don't know what you're carrying today. I don't know what battle you're fighting. We all have our own, and everyone's situation is different. And I don't know what prayer you're waiting on. I don't know. But I do know this. Keep walking, keep praying, keep showing up, keep believing, even if it's one step at a time, one day at a time, or one breath at a time. Because the dark night of the soul is not the end of the story. It's often the chapter right before the breakthrough. And sometimes when you finally reach the other side, you realize God was never absent at all. He was walking beside you through the darkness the entire time. So let's bow our heads and take this to the Lord. Father, today we come before you carrying things that many people never see. Some of us are carrying heartbreak. Some of us are carrying grief. Some are carrying disappointment. And some are carrying loneliness. Some are carrying questions that have gone unanswered for months, maybe years, or maybe even decades. So Lord, there are people listening today, right now, who feel exhausted, and not physically exhausted, soul exhausted. They've prayed, they've waited, they've cried, and they've hoped. And they're wondering how much longer can they keep going. It's a terrible place to be in. Please help us. And Father, for those walking through a dark night of the soul, remind them that the darkness does not mean abandonment. And remind them that silence does not mean absence. Remind them that just because they cannot see your hand moving does not mean that you are not working behind the scenes. Give strength to those who feel weak. Give hope to those who feel discouraged. Give peace to those whose minds are racing. Give courage to those who are afraid of the future. And give faith to those who are struggling to believe that better days are still ahead. Lord, help us trust you when we don't understand. Help us walk when we can't see. And help us hold on when everything inside us wants to quit. Teach us that our value is not based on what we've lost, not based on who left, and not based on success or failure, and not based on the opinion of others, but on who we are in you. Help us remember that some of the greatest people in Scripture walked through the dark seasons. Joseph, David, Job, Elijah, and Jesus, and yet you never left them, and you will not leave us. For those who feel forgotten tonight, remind them they are seen. For those who feel alone, remind them that they are loved. And for those who feel broken, remind them that they are still being shaped by your hands. And for those who feel like giving up, remind them that this chapter is not the end of their story. Lord, let tomorrow bring new strength, new perspective, and new hope. And even if the answers don't come right away, help us trust that you are still writing a story bigger than the one we can see. We place our fears in your hands, our pain in our future as well. And we ask you to help us keep moving forward one step at a time. And Father, lift every single person listening to my voice who is trapped in their own dark night. Father, you see the tears, you see the racing thoughts at 3 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the morning. You see the weight pinning them to the mattress. I pray for a supernatural deliverance. I pray you build an unshakable wall of your spirit. Let every evil connection stumble, go south, and turn negative until the illusion completely shatters. And Lord, while the fire is burning away that needs to die, keep the spiritual wire hot. Build that steel arch bridge across the chaotic waters and give us unshakable patience to stand on the edge of our Red Sea, trusting that you are setting the stage for a resurrection, and deliver us from fear, settle our hearts, and remind us that morning is coming. And we ask all this in your Son's precious holy name, Jesus Christ. Amen. So maybe you're in the middle of your dark night of the soul. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're questioning everything. But don't mistake the darkness for the end of the story. Some things grow in the sunlight and others grow in darkness. And maybe, just maybe, God is doing his deepest work in a place you cannot see. Remember, your integrity is your legacy. Treat others the way you want to be treated. God has no favorites, and karma has no favorites either. Thank you for spending this time with me on Cracked Open. Check that description for the playlist link. Stand firm on your wall, protect your peace, and walk in faith. And if you're walking through a dark night of the soul, don't mistake the darkness for the end of the story. We will talk next week. I'm Glen. I love you all, and goodbye for now.
Thank you for listening to Cracked Open. If today's episode spoke to you, please share it with someone who might need a little light in their own dark season. Remember, even in brokenness, there's beauty waiting to be found. Every crack is a place where the light can shine through. Until next time, stay true, stay hopeful, and keep your heart open.